Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming today. My name is Melissa Witham, and I work with C4 Innovations and the Opioid Response Network. And today we'll be talking about offering support at the end of life's journey. I'd like to thank our presenters for coming today. We have Kristen Martin and Diane Snyder-Cohen, and they will introduce themselves in just a minute. And we encourage all of you who are on the call today to introduce yourselves in our chat box where you can post questions and comments. And later in our presentation, we will open the phone lines, and we would strongly encourage you to ask your questions of the presenters. And if something comes to mind in the meantime, you can also post your question in this chat box throughout the event. And just a little bit more about the Opioid Response Network. Opioid Response Network is part of SAMHSA's State Targeted Response TA grant, and our goal is to assist STR grantees, organizations, and other individuals who are providing services and support to people with opioid use disorders. And in particular, our ORN supports technical assistance, which is training and education and resource sharing and other ways to support prevention, treatment, and recovery of OUD. And anybody can request a technical assistance from the Opioid Response Network. We have a designated team of technology transfer specialists throughout the country who will receive your request and talk more about your goals and what your organization and your state are looking to achieve and how the ORN could best assist you. C4 Innovations is a core partner of the Opioid Response Network, and we primarily support recovery-related technical assistance, and the ORN supports all types of prevention, treatment, recovery, harm reduction, etc. If you would like to connect with the Opioid Response Network, you can visit our website at www.opioidresponsenetwork.org, email at orn@aaap.org, or call us. And please be advised again that this event is sponsored by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And with that, I'd like to hand this over to Kristen Martin.
All right, hello. My name is Kristen Martin, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Currently, I'm the program director for early childhood mental health at the Department of Public Health. One of the programs that I supervise is called the HEART program, and that stands for Healing, Empowering, and Recovering Together. Our first pilot site was in Floyd County, and that's in current operation there. We're looking at other sites to pilot this program in the future. But our team consists of peer support specialists, social workers, hand staff, as well as early childhood mental health specialists. So this program is for women who are in recovery that are either pregnant or have a child up to 2 years of age. And we offer support to them and wraparound services while they're in our program. And before this role, I was actually a bereavement counselor for a local hospice agency in Lexington, Kentucky. And that local agency is Bluegrass Care Navigators. Through my bereavement work there, I served as a bereavement counselor and worked on a hospice team of individuals with hospice patients and their families before death, as well as working with the family members and friends after the death of a loved one. So that is how I am present with you all today, and I will hand it over to Diane so that she can give a brief introduction on herself as well.
Hi everyone, I am Diane Snyder-Cohen, and I am the Director of Western Reserve Grief Services, which is part of Hospice of the Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. And I have been in this position this is my 19th year. I oversee the hospice bereavement, the community bereavement, the expressive therapy team, which is music and art therapy. And my letters there stand for Certified Hospice and Palliative Care Administrator and Music Therapist Board Certified. I'm hearing a little echo. I hope nobody else is hearing that echo. Also, I am the bereavement professional leader for National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization's communities, and I am the vice chair of the executive committee. I'm part of the trauma-informed end-of-life care work group and also the bereavement after an opioid death work group. I'm passionate about the work that I do, and I'm excited to be here today. I've presented regionally and locally and nationally and have written quite a bit, and so I hope that we'll have a good time here today and talk about how we could support people at the end of life. Kristen, I'm turning it back to you.
Get started here. So welcome to the first of 3 webinar series that are focused on the way that a peer support specialist can offer support to people at the end of life. This session is focused on how to offer support to a dying person. The second session will focus on the final stages of life, and the third will focus on grief as well as caring for yourself when you're offering support to a dying person. We highly recommend that you attend all 3 sessions since all of our information will continue to build. And we're really thankful that we're able to provide this information for you today and hope that it will equip you with the tools that you need to feel competent when you're working with people at the end of their life. The main objectives that we're going to cover today are learning how to support someone who is actively dying, as well as increase your level of support while supporting a dying person as well as their family. All right, so since many people elect hospice care when they are diagnosed with a terminal illness, we felt that it was really important for you to understand what hospice services are and how you can get access to these. Hospice is for end-of-life care that focuses on the patient and their family rather than just the illness itself. Hospice offers medical, emotional, social, and spiritual support centered on quality of life considerations. Hospice is a specialized program that offers help, comfort, and support to people with serious illness and their families. When a patient reaches the point in their life where the cure is no longer the focus of care, but instead comfort and quality of life become the primary focus, hospice can help. Far more than just the medical needs of the patient, hospice focuses on all the factors that contribute to the highest possible quality of life: physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. Services typically provided by hospice include medical care delivered by specially trained physicians, nurses, and other clinicians, as well as DNAs, social work services, spiritual services, volunteer programs, and grief counseling. The focus is on meeting the needs of both the patient and
line muted.
promoting full and meaningful life when time matters most. Hospice care is provided by a team of professional caregivers who work closely with patients and their families to address individual plan and pain and symptom needs through physical, psychological, spiritual, and social interventions. Hospice is available to anyone who is diagnosed with a terminal illness with a life expectancy of 6 months or less to live. Hospice is appropriate for those with a terminal illness when the goal of treatment begins to shift from curing the illness to quality of life. This time sometimes comes well before a physician indicates that the patient's life expectancy is likely 6 months or less. And sadly, many people and physicians wait way too long or until the last moments of life and final days to involve hospice care. By contacting hospice earlier, patients and families have time to better understand their options and choose a path that will have the most positive impact on their quality of life. A patient can change their mind at any time and pursue other care options for any reason. All they have to do is notify their hospice team. Some hospice providers offer specialized programs or services such as massage, pet therapy, and music therapy. And some hospice programs also offer pediatric services. Payment for hospice services is widely accepted.
Line unmuted.
Medicaid, Medicare, and most private insurance plans pay for hospice care. The person can always call their insurance provider to check on what's covered, as well as the hospice team. That's a main focus of theirs as well, and they can assist the family in finding out what will be covered. Most importantly, no patient will ever be denied hospice care or support based on their inability to pay. There are many benefits to having hospice care. You have a team of experts that assist you and educate you on end-of-life care. You're able to call 24/7 and ask questions, as well as receive support from the hospice team. And the support doesn't end when your loved one dies. Anyone connected to the patient is able to access free grief counseling services after the death of their loved one. Depending on the area that you live in, you may be able to access individual counseling, group counseling sessions, or activities of remembrance. Supporting the actively dying person. So we have a question that we'd like you to discuss in the chat box where you've been introducing yourself. In that chat box, if you don't mind, please share if you have had an experience of sitting with an actively dying person. You're welcome to share the experience with the group or ask questions. And I'm going to give you just a minute of time so you have a chance to type and you don't feel the pressure to listen and type at the same time. So go ahead and take a moment to enter that into the chat box. All right, it looks like we have 2 responses now and we don't have anyone typing, but if you think of something, you're welcome to share as we move along through this content. So the average person feels scared, uncomfortable, or nervous to sit with a dying person. Feeling comfortable with this comes with time and practice. It's important to have courage to do this because we don't grow staying in our comfort zone. Taking action by offering support to a dying person helps us move forward and grow in the support that we are able to offer. I have found that practicing these conversations with ourselves or even with someone else that you feel comfortable with can help. Sometimes our anxiety is reduced when we feel like we have a plan of what we might like to say. However, it is really important to know that we can't predict how a conversation will go and be flexible to a change in conversation. One thing that I like to note often is that even hospice professionals struggle with these types of conversations, and they do this for a living. Embrace the silence and be present with the actively dying person. A state of presence is no small task. To be present means to be in the here and now, be present with our mind and our feelings, be available for whatever is necessary, be silent, be listening, be communicating when needed, to look within, and to see the needs around us. These attitudes help us to develop the spiritual strength we need to orient our own lives, as well as to help others. If being silent is difficult for you, Sometimes it's helpful to take something with you to do, such as a word search or a book to read. You could also try doing something that that person enjoyed doing, such as knitting or playing cards. Even if it's something that you're not good at or not a hobby of yours, just simply trying that activity can make a connection to the person who is actively dying. Just being in the room with the person can be enough comfort for them. Your presence is reassurance that everything is okay. Trust your instincts when offering support. Do what you think is the right thing for the person. You have a relationship with this person and probably even have a gut feeling about what the person may need from you. Don't overthink or second guess yourself. Go with what you're feeling. Most people need reassurance that their friends and family members will be okay once they have died. Offer the dying person reassurance and that all the important people in their lives will be okay. Some people would like to heal previously conflicted or estranged relationships before they die. And if this is something that's important to that person you are supporting, you could play a vital role in helping him or her accomplish this task. So for example, you could offer to help the person call their son to explain the circumstances and begin the reconciliation process. Having hours, weeks, or even months with a person that you care about can help the dying person feel a sense of relief before their death. This is also helpful for the family member or friend after the person has died to feel less guilt and regret. This isn't a time to pass judgment or say things like, well, what I would do is this or that. As we all know, recovery looks different at end of life. There are some added measures that are needed to provide physical reduction of pain, such as the use of medical marijuana or medication to reduce pain and relieve anxious or depressive symptoms. There are also non-pharmacological interventions to try for pain reduction, such as massage, relaxation techniques, acupuncture, physical therapy, pet therapy, and music therapy. These interventions can be very helpful, but it is important to understand that sometimes more is needed in the last moments of life to make the person physically, mentally, and emotionally comfortable. Preparing for death. As a peer support specialist, you can assist the dying person with end-of-life planning. It is important to remember that the focus should be always on the dying person. Limit sharing your own experiences, since this can shift the focus away from them and it minimizes their feelings. It's natural to be nervous going into these types of conversations. It may be beneficial to take a moment to take a deep breath beforehand and center yourself and remind yourself that your calming presence and listening ear are more important than the words you choose to say. Every dying person has their own idea of what preparing for death might look like for them. No two families or individuals are alike when it comes to end-of-life care. Your role as a healthy support in the dying person's life is to ask them what this looks like for them. So for example, do they prefer to be at home in hospice care surrounded by their friends and family? Or maybe they prefer to be in the hospital being treated for their illness up until the time that they die. Or maybe even they want to be alone. This is like recovery planning, which is goal setting. The difference is that you're exploring how recovery looks different at the end of a person's life and what goals they have for themselves. It's important to also think about the approach to the services that we're offering. I always talk about there are 3 different types of options when providing services for a family. The first one in providing services is providing services to a family, meaning I'm developing this great plan that I want you to follow and do exactly what I think is best for you. This is a punitive approach, and it's really not helpful. The second can be doing services for a family and never allowing them to learn how to care or do things for themselves. This approach is also not helpful. But the third is doing things with a family, which is working together to develop a plan that empowers the individual and family to make choices for themselves with your support and assistance. The third way of goal setting or recovery planning is much more successful because it is putting the individual and family in the driver's seat. It is not for us to choose, and we should not tell them what they should choose. It's important to be brave and ask these questions so that you know that the person's wishes are being fulfilled. More often than not, as mentioned before, pain medication can be prescribed at the end of life to make the person more comfortable. Taking prescribed medication that is being administered by a medical professional is not returning to use. Medication can help people die in peace, meaning limited or no pain, decreases restlessness, and decreases anxious and depressive symptoms. You can be a huge advocate for the dying person. Help them feel empowered to make end-of-life decisions and discuss these with their family, their friends, and their medical professionals. You can acknowledge or normalize the dying person's feelings to reassure them. This can build trust, openness, and self-respect. Things that you can say to normalize thoughts and feelings are, that is a common reaction when going through something like this. Or a statement like, having physical pain can make things hard to manage. It is also important to realize that you have feelings that are normal when working with people who are dying. We must realize that our own thoughts and feelings are normal before we're able to normalize others' feelings. Being an active listener is a helpful skill to use when supporting a dying person. Most people listen to respond instead of listening to understand. We want to shift our focus to listening to understand the person who we are sitting with. Avoid excessive talking and get comfortable with sitting in the silence. Some sample reflective statements that you could use are, this must be hard for you, or help me to understand how you're feeling. Feel and understand what the person is saying to you instead of filling the silence with chatter. There are so many things that distract us from being an active listener. Try to limit these distractions by turning off the television, silencing your phone, and trying to be at eye level with the person if possible. Ask open-ended questions like, what's on your mind today, to invite more conversation. Don't interrupt or try to finish the person's sentence. Sitting in silence can be very powerful. Also, holding someone's hand with permission can be more powerful than words when being an active listener. If you are unsure what the person is discussing, inquire more by making statements like, tell me more, or help me to understand what you mean. People do not have as much stamina as they once did at the end of their life. Be aware of the signs of fatigue and don't push too far. People need more rest at the end of their life. Support the dying person in standing up for themselves during this time. Empower them to share their wishes with family members, friends, and their medical team. Their opinion is the most important one, and it needs to be heard. Remind the person that their wishes matter. Offer empathy without offering advice. It's not helpful to say things like, I know exactly how you were feeling to a dying person. There's absolutely no way for us to understand what this process is like since we've never gone through it ourselves. Even though these are well-intended messages, making statements like these minimize the person's thoughts and feelings. Empathy is helpful. Empathy is feeling with someone. Empathy is not understanding how another person's shoes feel on your feet. Empathy is about understanding how a person's shoes feel on their feet. People connect through realness, so it's important for you to be authentic when having these conversations. So Dr. Brene Brown lists the following as 4 key steps to showing empathy. The first is perspective taking. Next, we have staying out of judgment and listening, recognizing emotion in another person that maybe you have felt before, and then communicating that you can recognize that emotion. When we are struggling, we long for empathy, but what we most often receive is sympathy. So I know that Melissa emailed you all this video from Brene Brown on empathy, and we couldn't get it to link up where we could actually watch it together today. I'm sure several people have seen this before. If you have not, it's a great video to watch. I think it perfectly illustrates the difference between empathy and sympathy. So I am just going to do like a brief illustration of what is said in this video so that you have a common understanding of what we're talking about. But I highly, highly encourage you to watch this after our webinar today. If you haven't seen it, or even if you have seen it, it's a great resource to revisit. So what is empathy and why is it different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy is very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions, where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth, while staying out of judgment, which is not always easy when we enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people, and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone is kind of in a deep hole, and they shout out from the bottom and they say, "I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed." And then we look and we say, "Hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone." Sympathy is saying something like, "Ooh, it's bad, uh-huh. No, do you want a sandwich?" Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable one. Because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathetic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So if someone tells you something like, "So, I had a miscarriage," and you respond with, "Well, at least you know you can get pregnant." Or if someone says something like, "I think my marriage is falling apart," and you respond with, "At least you have a marriage." Or if they say, "John's getting kicked out of school," and you respond with, "At least Sarah is an A student." None of these responses make a person feel better or feel like you understand their struggles. But one of the things that we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is try to make things better. If someone shares something with you that's very difficult, it's better to say, "I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm so glad you chose to share that with me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Diane, and she is going to finish out this webinar today.
Thank you. You did a great impersonation of Brene Brown. Applaud yourself. That was really good. So rarely can you make something better. What makes something better is connection. And when's the connection? When you show up, when you're present. That's when you make the connection. So again, empathy fuels connection, sympathy drives disconnection. I'm just going to go to the next slide. On this slide we have some examples of a sympathy statement versus an empathy statement. And it's tempting to offer sympathy when we don't know what to say or when we feel bad for the person. So I know exactly how you feel. Don't you hate that when someone says that to you? I know exactly how you feel. We never know exactly how you feel. You could say, I don't know what to say, but this must be very hard for you. So that's just an example. Offering sympathy is not helpful, even though it usually comes from a good place. And I remember that from a very long time ago when I said something to someone after her daughter died, and I said something that I had heard my parents say to other people, and that's that she's in a better place. And this woman gave me a very hard time for about 45 minutes, that she wasn't in a better place, that she needed to be home with me. So we're tempted to offer advice when we feel uncomfortable. We want to fill the space with advice, but it doesn't help support the person. So sitting in the discomfort, while it might be uncomfortable for you, is really helpful and helps you connect with the other person. And we really want to avoid platitudes and cliches. Kristen talked about the at least, and I know just how you feel, but if you could type in the chat box things that people have said to you that have minimized your feelings, that have been off the mark, well, they may have come from a good place but weren't. For example, life goes on, or count your blessings, or how old is your dad? He's 90? Oh, that's a really old age. That's fantastic. Well, where do those things hit you in your heart? So we want to hear what you have to say. Another example is when someone says something that's really awful and you say, what a terrible thing, and your face is in shock and you're really emoting with them, you can say something more like, you seem pretty distressed, tell me more about how you're feeling. That tell me more is a great phrase to use for all clinicians and all people in the world, and help me understand how you're feeling. Then you can relate to that person in a better way. One of the most powerful things we can do to support is provide the experience of feeling understood. At least. That's never felt good. If I were you, I would, is offering advice. We don't want to do that. It's God's will. Well, how do we know it's God's will? Well, at least he won't be suffering anymore. Well, but he won't be here, so I'll be suffering. If somebody comes to something in their own time, that's well and good. But for you to say it to someone else, it's not so great. So just be present, be quiet, listen, ask open-ended questions, and open your heart and show love is the way to go with empathy. Moving along, we're going to talk about benefits of end-of-life conversations. And most people feel uncomfortable or awkward with end-of-life conversations because we're a death-denying, pain-avoiding society. I'm looking at Tanya S., who said, at my mother's funeral, I was told that someone knew exactly how I felt. They had just broke up with a girlfriend they dated for 2 weeks. Oh, that would be really hurtful. They do not know how you feel, and how can you relate dating and breaking up with the death of a person? So I think, from my perspective, what I have learned from other people that I've worked with over the years is when I ask them, what have they heard that has been hurtful? And then when I hear all these comments that people say, I tell them, don't say those things. So what you have found hurtful, don't repeat to others, because it's not helpful for them either, probably. All right, so end-of-life conversations. Pain-avoiding, death-denying society, we don't want to have these conversations. We're uncomfortable having these conversations, but dying is a natural part of life. And in fact, 1 out of 1 persons will die. So being open and honest is really important. Kristen talked a little bit about end-of-life planning, and I want to talk a little bit more about actually advanced care directives and advanced care planning. And Advanced care planning is, well, many people, I'm wondering how many of you have your advanced care directives. So that would be a living will, a durable power of attorney, a regular will, a durable power of attorney for health care, all those pieces of paper that let others know what you want at end of life. So many people have not completed their advanced care directives, or perhaps they have, but they haven't shared it with anyone. And it's important to talk with the dying person to find out what they want for their medical care and afterwards. And you might need to ask them what they know about their illness. You can ask them, what have you been told about your illness, or what have you been told about your condition? They may know far more than you would imagine, or they may know far less than you would imagine. And it's not your place to share medical information with someone, but it might be helpful for you to know what they know and where they're thinking and what their wishes are. Equally as important is these written advance directives. So there was research that was done by the Pew Center for Research in 2005, and they found that 84% of those surveys said they support laws that let terminally ill patients make decisions that to be kept alive, what kind of medical treatment they want, but only 29% have completed a living will. And how many of you have done that? I know that I completed a living will about 10 years ago when I was about to have a major surgery, but other than if I wasn't going to have that, I probably wouldn't have. And I work in hospice, and I hear all kinds of stories. But doing that was a great exercise for me, and since my mother died about a year and a half ago, I also created a regular will, because my original will was when my children were babies and they're adults now. But even when people have completed their living will and their advanced directives, they put them somewhere in a safe place, and then nobody knows where they are. And this happened to my nephew most recently. He had aneurysm, and he had an aneurysm 30 years ago, and then he had another aneurysm about 9 months ago. And he did have a living will and advance directives, but his brother didn't know where they were. And so his brother, when asked, should they do brain surgery, said, yes, of course, I want to save my brother. And unfortunately, they did the brain surgery, and my nephew Paul lived and is still living, but he is in a vegetative state. And so it was very unfortunate, because then they found the living will, and then his brother felt awful that he didn't follow his wishes. So we plan for weddings, we plan for births, we plan for all kinds of major events, but we don't plan for the end of our life. So this is my little soapbox to encourage you to do so, but to talk with the person that you're caring for to make sure that they have their wishes known. What treatment is helpful? What treatment wouldn't be helpful? What are the benefits? What are the burdens? And advanced care directives are great if they're written, but if they're not shared, if you don't have the conversation, then they're not helpful to anyone. So what keeps people from doing this? There's physical barriers. So as a person is declining with their health, maybe they can no longer talk and share their wishes. So that's why it's good to do it upstream. There's social emotional barriers. People think that if they do their advanced care directives, then all of a sudden they're going to die the next day, kind of like magical thinking. There's cultural barriers. People don't want to talk about it, or there's only one person in the family that you would talk with. And there's a lack of information about this as well. People don't know that they should do this or how to do this. And the laws are different in every state, so you really want to make sure that you have done this according to the state laws where you live. There's different forms for different states. And then if the person does know they're dying, what do they want their final days to be like? And Kristen talked about this a little bit. Where do they want to be? Who do they want around? Who do they not want around? These are things that you want to honor. Do they want music? Do they want to listen to readings? What kind of readings? Do they want to be part of their funeral planning? Some people do and some people don't, but you might want to have these conversations. And if you're the person who's with the dying person and they're opening up to you, that's a wonderful gift, and maybe you're the only person they're sharing these wishes with, so it would be good to know. You know, some people want to plan every detail of their funeral, every single detail, from what they're going to wear, where they want it, what music, what readings, and some people think, hey, I'll be dead, they can take care of it. So that's a question to ask. But there's many benefits of having these end-of-life conversations. It reduces anxiety and stress. It can increase peaceful and meaningful conversations and feeling more prepared for the end of life. and it really ensures that the dying person's wishes are being fulfilled. We have over 6,000 deaths a year, and I talk with a lot of people after their person has died, and they call and they're very upset and confused, and they think that they murdered their loved one, or they did the wrong thing, and they shouldn't have taken off the vent, or they should have tried this treatment, and they're really guilt-ridden, and they feel awful about their person's death and that they played a role or they made the wrong decision. And I always ask, what were your person's wishes? Did they have advance directives? Did you follow them? And when they say, yeah, it really provides some relief that they know that they did the right thing. When my father was very ill, he had his living will, and it said no food or fluids. And they were talking about whether or not to put an IV in him, and I said, no, it says no food or fluids. And my mother goes, oh, I didn't know what that means. So again, lack of information is really part of this all too. So we want to make sure that we are going to really work towards having a good death by fulfilling the person's wishes, but knowing what those wishes are. And if you don't have a conversation, then you can't find a wish. So here are some sample conversation starters, and Kristen alluded to a few of these also, and they could be used for a variety of reasons. We're going to talk two things, one about the benefits of doing life review, and then some of the things to look out for when doing life review. So life review can be a great opportunity to feel good about past accomplishments and achievements, and a time to create a legacy for the family. And one of the ways of managing anticipatory grief is through legacy and reflection techniques. And we'll talk more about anticipatory grief as we work through these webinars, but basically anticipatory grief is when you can anticipate the death of a loved one or the death of yourself. And it has that dual perspective. And for people who have been using, they have experienced grief along the way when their loved one was using or in recovery or using, or when their person was ill and if, say, their person had dementia, there could have been many losses along the way. So there's a lot to anticipatory grief, but if you have the luxury of time and you have months rather than days, you can do some pretty cool things. Remembering and telling old stories, looking at old pictures, listening to music, can really touch the person and bring memories to mind and significant events and feelings of significance and meaning and purpose that they have done things in their life. It's good to review on those and look back, and then you can share the stories from generation to generation, and you keep the spirit of the person alive. And it's really about finding meaning and purpose in what they did and what they're doing now. And for lots of people at the end of life, one of their losses is this loss of meaning and purpose. But if they can look back on what they've done, they can integrate that into where they are. And one legacy technique is the use of ethical wills. An ethical will is not leaving your valuables, but leaving your values. And it's a way of passing on personal legacies, blessings, beliefs, values, things that are important to you. And they have a 3,000-year-old history that goes back to biblical times, to the book of Genesis, when the dying Jacob gathered his children around him and told him his blessings and his funeral plans and different things like that. And scriptural writing reflected moral directives and blessings and burial instructions. And they were mostly oral till the 13th or 14th centuries, and then they were put into writing to include ethical values, personal histories, and they were attached to legal wills. And there was a gender inequality thing back then because women didn't have property, but they could still create wills, and they could still pass on what was important to them. And some historians found letters and books where they were passed on their values. Then there was a period of time where ethical wills weren't really in fashion, but they are now. And they're really helpful to families to acknowledge the past and present and future losses, which are part of anticipatory grief, and integrate those experiences into their life now and bring meaning and purpose. So there's many reasons to do an ethical will. You learn about yourself, you can affirm the past, you can identify what you value most, you can preserve stories, and there's all different types. And sitting with someone at their end of life, you can gather their stories, you could be jotting them down, you could record them, you could create music if they're a musician, or you have a music therapist that's coming to see, and do so many different things with them. My dad was a World War II vet, and he, prior to him getting ill, he was only in hospice for 8 hours, but prior, when I first started working for hospice, they were doing StoryCorps and interviewing World War II vets for the National Archives. So they interviewed my dad, and we had a CD of an hour's worth of him talking about his experience in the war and his experience in life. And all 5 adult children got a copy of this, and I didn't listen to it. And then after his death, about 2 years or so after his death, I was listening to it, and I thought, wow, this is my dad's ethical wills, because there was a story in there about how he valued family and about his integrity and how he valued education. And all those things that are important to me were important to him. And so that was a beautiful ethical will for us to have. And especially, his voice was on there. So it was great to have his voice. We have families that write letters to their children and their grandchildren. We had a woman who wrote 3 lullabies for her grandchildren and her unborn grandchildren, and then we recorded them, and they were so beautiful. And when she became agitated at end of life, we played the CD for her, and she passed peacefully, and then that CD was left for her children and her grandchildren and her unborn grandchildren. For my mother, my mother thought she was signed on to hospice and died the next day, and it doesn't work that day, and so she was on hospice for a few weeks, and she felt like she was in the movie Groundhog Day. Every day was the same thing over and over. And we thought we would do something with her, and my mother was a needlepoint artist, and she had hundreds of needles, we thought hundreds. It ended up being 102 needlepoints that she had created that were out the country, and we took pictures of them with the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all the relatives who had one, photographed them. My sister put them together in a Shutterfly book, and there we had this beautiful book. Each of us have a book of all of her needlepoints. Our agency does a lot of different things. We have a drone situation where we do a flight to remember, and it gives patients the opportunity to look at a special place that was important to them. So it could be these drones fly off the company has drones all over the world. So one was in Italy, so this person was able to see her childhood memory. One was just a cabin down the road that she couldn't get to. And now this gentleman who has this program, Flight to Remember, has over 100 hospices that he works for and does these wonderful activities. And most recently, there was a 92-year-old woman who was in Puerto Rico in Hurricane Maria and came to the mainland to stay with relatives, and she can't get back there, but they sent a drone over there so that she could see where she grew up. So it's just all these wonderful things that you could do. Other things to consider is that remembering funny stories and times helps improve a person's mood. You're focusing on not just on their physical pain, but how they're feeling emotionally and physically and spiritually. You can check in with them about what's most important today with them. Is there anything they still want to do, like a bucket list? And a bucket list is making things that they want to do before they die. Now, hopefully all of us are filling up their bucket lists now, so that we can put things in our bucket list, and when we're coming near the end of our lives, we can just pull out things in the bucket and remember them. But sometimes you just want, a person wants to make it for their child's wedding, or somebody's going to be having a baby and they want to stay alive until then. So you don't want to give them false hope. You could say something like, oh, that would be nice if it happened. But there are other things that could maybe happen. For example, if someone says, I want to be able to walk my daughter down the aisle on her wedding day, you might say, that's important to you. I hope that can happen. But in our inpatient units, we've had many weddings that people have brought their weddings earlier so that they can do them with their family member. But there might be 1 or 2 things that they can do that are attainable to them. So we could talk with the medical team and see what kind of events that you can make happen for your person. I'm speaking fast because I see we're closing up to time, and I want to get to this last comment here. So it might sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because Life Review is wonderful, and I told you about all these wonderful, beautiful things that you can do, but at the same time, we want to be sensitive to the fact that sometimes revisiting the past can bring up triggers, and we want to be sensitive to that. We want to tread carefully. We don't want to trigger unpleasant memories. We don't want to trigger trauma symptoms. If we want to be trauma-informed, and we're in the world now where we're providing trauma-informed care. And when we think about traumas, we think about the big traumas, car accidents, assaults, all the big T's that happen in a person's life, Holocaust survivors, veterans. But there's little traumas that happen. There could have been traumas during a person's time of use. There could have been incarceration. There could have been children taken away. There could have been all different kinds of things. So we want to be aware of that. And a medical diagnosis, such as you have a terminal illness, can be traumatic as well. So we want to think about that when we're working with someone, and if it looks like they don't want to talk about the past, that's okay. They don't need to talk about the past. So anything can trigger a trauma, from a question about, tell me about your time back then, or it could be latex gloves, a stethoscope, personal care. All these things can trigger trauma symptoms. So if we think about SAMHSA's 4 R's of trauma-informed care, they are to realize the widespread impact of trauma, and that would be that between 50 and 90% of people have experienced the trauma, and the trauma lives in your body, and we can't always pick and choose when those symptoms are going to be triggered. We want to recognize what those symptoms are, and they could be irritability, hypervigilance, all different types of symptoms. We want to respond, and how can we respond? We can respond with empathy, with an open heart, with being full of love and compassion, and we want to resist re-traumatizing. So if going through life review and looking back, which is a natural part of the aging process and what people do at end of life, if that is triggering trauma-like symptoms, we don't have to go there. We can talk about strength-based questions. Tell me something that you've learned about yourself, a strength that you've had. How did you acquire this strength? What's a difficult situation you were in that you learned something important about yourself or that changed in a positive way? And you can have very powerful, meaningful conversations that way. So to wrap up, we've talked about a lot of things here, but the main one is to be yourself. Be brave. Go into these families with an open heart, with kindness and compassion. Trust your gut, trust your instincts. Educate yourself on your end of life, which is what you're doing now, and our next session is really going to talk about some of the physical symptoms, and then the third session on grief. Learn coping skills, and we'll be talking about that as well, and utilize your support systems. Talk to people that you trust, that you can try to figure out why you might be responding the way you're responding and how you can best help the person that you're serving. So I talked fast to cover those things. I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen to handle any questions, and I'm hoping that we have some questions coming up. So if you want to learn more about ethical wills, I would Google ethicalwills.com, or you can Google Barry Baines. He's like the king of ethical wills. Some people just call it legacies, leaving legacies, but there is, and you can find templates for ethical wills and questions. If you're interviewing a veteran, there's a list of veteran questions that you could look up. There's all different kinds of ways you can get information from people, and it's also something that you can do while you're sitting with someone during those final weeks. That they are not going anywhere or doing anything.
I'm now unmuted. I'm sorry.
So Melissa, are there any questions out there?
Well, just to let everybody know, the phone lines are open, so if you are dialed in, you can unmute yourself if you've muted yourself and ask a question. I think there are a lot of really interesting points that came up in the chat.
This is Sharon Heseltine. Hi, everybody. One of the things that I wrote down a couple of notes as I was listening And one of the things that right in the beginning that really struck me, and I think it was connected into some of my own experience with my father, was having hospice involved at that 6 months. So we had for a long time, and one of the reasons that we chose to involve hospice so early is that it offered our family an opportunity for in-home coordinated care for my father, and a lot of support for all of us with folks who really understood this period of transition. And so when I think about for peers who are working with folks who are at end of life, offering the opportunity to engage hospice much earlier than we had ever really thought offers, there's I think, tremendous benefits to a family. And I think, part of our role in peer support is that advocacy role and making sure that folks are aware of what's available to them. So, and I know that for our family, it wasn't a situation with somebody who was in recovery, but just having that coordinated care and support for that length of time was just tremendous.
I'm glad you had that experience because, the average length of stay in a hospice is only 2 weeks, unfortunately. Doctors refer too late, so you were pretty lucky to have that experience. I see that there's a question about how to approach a person about living wills, and actually our agency has a booklet called Courage in Conversation because it is hard to carry on that conversation. Sometimes at family gatherings like Thanksgiving, you could bring it up. You could say, oh, I heard this thing on NPR about living wills. I think I'm going to have one. I haven't really thought about what I wanted at the end of life. Have you thought about it? Or what do you know about what your illness is? And have they told you what a prognosis is for you? Or what's your treatment like? Have you thought about what you want? And that could be your impetus to having that conversation. But it is being brave and courageous to have those conversations sometimes. So I have a client right now, and she's actively trying to avoid stage 4 cancer. So the thing is that you don't want to take away a person's hope. And I think hope is really important. Kristen, would you agree?
Oh, definitely. Mm-hmm. And two, I think we don't want to put our own thoughts and wishes on someone else. So that goes back into advice giving and all of those things. So I think not taking away their hope and being more of a listener instead of giving advice is huge in situations like that.
So asking those open-ended questions that maybe people haven't asked them before. So, for example, my mom, there's this something called a Serious Illness Conversation Guide, and my mom, the nurse practitioner asked her what her goals were. She was on palliative care, not on hospice at the time. And her goal was to be able to walk to the dining room. So her goals in life had really changed. And Kristen was talking about goals of care earlier on, and goals change. So for the person trying to avoid stage 4 cancer, ask her what her goals are right now. What is she hoping for? What does she want within the next 3-6 months? And maybe she can articulate that, and then you could just see where the conversation goes.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any other questions before? It looks like we still have 2 minutes.
Thank you all for listening. This is really a tough topic to listen to and hear about, so I think you've all been brave today just by being open to hearing this information.
Folks in the room, we have recorded today's event, and we will send you a link to today's recording and hope that you'll be able to come and join us next week when we continue the conversation. Kristen and Diane, did you want to talk a little bit more about next week and the third session?
Next week we're going to talk about kind of like the last days and week of life and what that looks like physically, emotionally, spiritually, what to look for, the physical signs and symptoms, what might be happening with the person who's dying. And then the final one is on grief and loss and self-care.
All right, guys, thank you so much for your time and attention today. All the things are downloadable under the file share, of course, and we hope to see you back next week whenever we cover final stages of a life's journey. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.